Welcome back, everybody, to our studies in GCSE history. This lesson is going to be talking about society as it existed under the reign of Nicholas II. So, again, this is the second half of our lessons looking at the economy and society, this part here, where we will examine the ways in which living and working conditions actually operated. We'll talk about the conditions in the cities versus the conditions in villages and all these different kinds of things. And ultimately, from here, we will move from this looking at some of the more socially revolutionary events which starts to take place under Nicholas II's reign, namely things like the 1905 revolution, the October Manifesto, the establishment of the Duma, a number of Stolypin's policies on land reform, etc., etc., etc. That will be the next topic of conversation. But for now, as a basic recap, we took a little bit of a look in the previous lesson at the economic and the economic development specifically of the reign of Nicholas II. We spoke quite significantly about the ways in which the Russian economy and the Russian Empire tried to encourage industrialization and development through industrialization and foreign investment, in addition to the ways and the means by which there were agricultural developments, and we sort of looked at the impact that this had on the economy more generally. This lesson is going to explore the societal developments which take place, again, partially because of economic developments. Specifically, we will look at these three topics. We will talk about the growth of a middle class, we will talk about reforms that were made to social welfare, and we will talk about the urbanization of the society within the Russian Empire. Essentially, the ways in which people started to move into the cities to seek out more industrial work. So beginning first, therefore, what can we say about the rise of a new middle class which we start to see taking shape under the reign of Nicholas? Well, generally speaking, workshop and factory owners, managers, traders, professionals of this kind would become more and more prominent as the result of industrialization and as the result of industrial developments that we start to see that we examined in the previous lesson. The new middle class, as it became known, would eventually start to play a greater role in politics, so namely through local political institutions such as the Zemstva. They would greatly start to generally oppose the Tsar, partially because of a lack of representation. And so this new middle class, while being something that came about partially and almost entirely, shall I say, as the result of the major shifts in the economy towards industrialization, they would slowly start to create problems for the Tsar in the sense that they would start to play a greater and greater role in politics. And so, like I said here, they would generally exist in opposition to the Tsar because of a lack of representation. The population in Russian cities is really where we see quite a significant change, and this obviously had a quite a strong social impact on the Russian Empire. So between 1867 and 1917, for example, looking towards the sort of end of the First World War and the devolving of the Russian Empire into a revolution, we see that the population of the cities, the population of Russian cities went from around 7 million to as many as 28 million. This is a significant shift, especially in what is relatively quite a short time period, about 50 or so years. The significant move to the cities is partially the result of industrialization. In 1914, for example, 10% of the population were factory workers. The conditions in these factories were particularly poor. Around 40% of the rented houses in cities like, for example, St. Petersburg, in fact, had no running water and had to collect sewage in hand carts. So the sort of conditions that existed in sort of Tudor England existed in St. Petersburg in 1914. Along this line of argumentation, there is also this condition about the workplaces and the regulation of the workplace. Fundamentally, there were no employment regulation for workforces. In 1914, for example, women made up around 20% of all the workforce, but they were by far and quite significantly the lowest paid within society. Social welfare equally was something that didn't really exist prior to the reign of Nicholas II, not in any meaningful sense, but the introduction of some more significant social welfare reforms took place just immediately before the reign of Nicholas II in 1892. There was the introduction, for example, of trade unions. There was a reduction of normal factory working hours to 10 hours a day. This takes place in 1914, so under the reign of Nicholas himself. Again, showing that there is a significant shift towards more social welfare, more employment regulation, but nowhere near the kind of levels that you would expect of this kind of society at the time at which it was taking place. Some of these will start to devolve into quite revolutionary activity, as we will see in the next couple of lessons. When we look at the 1905 revolution, we look at the compromise that was issued by Nicholas II himself, the introduction of a state Duma, and the October Manifesto. And then we will talk about how these things failed with the devolving of the Russian Empire into the First World War and the collapse of the Russian Empire, the abdication of Nicholas, and the sort of developments into the Russian Revolution.